both medical doctors, and he's
Good evening. This is Patrick Corey, and this is Speak Out. We've had a few technical difficulties, so we're starting just a little bit late today. Facebook stream isn't going to be running, but that's okay. So tonight I'm joined by Senator Diamond and Melanie Blair, who's a foster parent from Lisbon, and they've been, very involved in this sort of child abuse stuff that's been sort of happening at the state level. We've had a lot of deaths. So we'll discuss some of the shortfalls regarding it, and the Office of Child and Family Services, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, but we'll sort of explain that further as the night goes on. So why don't you both introduce yourselves and why this issue is of interest to you? So why don't you go first, Bill?
Yep. Well, thank you very much, Patrick, for having us. We always like to talk about this issue because it's such an important part of what goes on in the state, and there's so many problems that need to be addressed. So I appreciate the chance of being here tonight and on the old Speak Out show, which is nice to come back to that too. Let me just do a quick thing about what we're really talking about. We're talking about the Department of Health and Human Services, but within that, the largest bureaucracy in the state of Maine, within that, way down deep, is a place called the Office of Child and Family Services. And what that does, that controls, responsible for all the child welfare pieces, and that includes children who are abused, and they go to investigate to see if the child should be removed, or they may place the child there that they've taken from someplace else in a home. It also includes foster parents, which Melanie Blair is going to talk about a little bit tonight. But all in all, that's probably the most important part of the entire Department of Health and Human Services, but that's where there's been the most problems. Since 2007, there's been approximately 178 child deaths, and those children were all associated one way or another with the Department of Health and Human Services. So we've learned over the years, and I've been at this since 2001, 21 years, and that includes 4 different administrations. It started with an independent, Governor King, and then Governor Baldacci, then Governor LePage, and currently Governor Mills. And I have to tell you, under each one of those, there's been some serious problems. They didn't do everything wrong, they did a lot of things right, but there's been serious problems that haven't been addressed. And we want to talk about those tonight. And we want to talk about, why that Office of Health and Human Services, being tucked away as it is, they have trouble servicing or meeting all their responsibilities. And part of that's going to be foster parents who we depend on in the state because virtually they're angels for the kids who have no places to go. So I'm going to stop right there and let Melanie talk a little bit about what she does. Again, she is so well qualified and has dedicated her life to making this foster care program better.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. As Bill said, I've been kind of at this for a number of years. I've been a licensed foster parent for about 8 years, going on 8, but I've been dealing with children for 2 decades. I started off working for Spurlink, which is a residential treatment home for kids that have some serious behaviors. I spent about 10 years there. After that, I went on to get my bachelor's degree in education, where I spent the next 15 or so years in working at a public school in special ed. So I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of kids across the board with different needs, and many of the kids that were in the residential homes were also in foster care or state custody, and some kids at school were as well. So working with kids in general is just something that I've always been passionate about, keeping them safe and trying to work as a team to accomplish that goal, and that's how we got into foster care as a family.
So I have a question for sure. So, the way I think that, we tend to think of things kind of as legislators, and right now this thing is going through the Government Oversight Committee, which, is a part of the legislature. It's got six Republican six senators and six representatives, on it. Usually they're fairly trusted people, in the legislature that, will do a good job, and they've sort of been peeling back the layers on this, right, and sort of trying to figure out how to sort out this problem. And you had also mentioned sort of the Office of Child and Family Services, which is, a part of the Department of Health and Human Services, and the problems that have sort of happened sort of across, several administrations and everything. I know that the head of OCFS is fairly new. He's been there for a couple of years. Is that a political appointee, or is it one that's, actually a hired...
Yeah, that's a good question, Patrick. What is the commissioner is appointed by the governor?
Yeah.
Then the commissioner appoints the director, which is Director Landry, is his name, and that'll change with every administration.
Yeah.
So it's rare, and in fact, the last four they've not carried over. So
that's interesting. So when we talk about sort of no consistency crossing those administrations with regard to handling these problems, that's if your top level director is replaced on each one of those.
And Melanie, she could speak to this. The foster care program, that's so important, and that's where a lot of the problems lie. And people need to know that this is an area of our state that we're responsible for. And kids have no place to go without foster parents. They're really in trouble. So maybe Melanie wants to answer some of the concerns that she's learned and seen and experienced as a foster parent herself.
We could do that, and I think that would be a great lead-in to maybe talking about just some of the findings that have occurred with the Government Oversight Committee.
Yep, good.
Great. Go ahead, Melanie.
I first became involved testifying for a bill that was presented to help make change within the department, and it was because I was seeing and experiencing firsthand some of these difficulties. I have a Facebook group page that's private for foster families and kinship providers to reach out for support, and the common theme is not only a lack of communication, but when you do communicate with the department and your message is contrary to what they're pursuing, there's a lot of retaliation that goes on behind the scenes, and that looks different for different districts. Some districts are notoriously worse in what I'm finding, but overall you'll see things like, our focus is reunification at all costs. And if you bring a concern, say, to the department about the safety of a bio parent, and you pursue it past the point of you've got your first answer, then you hear things like, if you're not for reunification, then maybe we need to find another placement for this child. And the same thing goes for if you're asking for services and you can't get services. You go find your own services for this child, and then you have consequences for doing that. So if we're not following the plan to their T, then we have repercussions. There is retaliation that goes on behind the scenes, and whether that's, like I said, we'll find another placement for this child, or it's, you're not going to get any more calls. You're on the list of difficult families. So we're expected to follow the plan, however the plan happens to be that day. And sometimes we're with the kid 24/7. We know their behaviors. We know what's going on with their family. We are working with the bio families and kinships, or maybe a fictive kin or something, to support relationships outside of our home. But we're seeing things that the department's not seeing during their once a month 30-minute visit.
Right.
And our voices are not heard.
So I want to boil down some of these terms a little bit because I don't know that sort of everybody's familiar with DHHS talk or foster parent talk. So you use terms like, like foster parent and kinship provider, if you could explain what those are. And then you also used, the term reunification. I remember I first saw this. I used to do marketing work for Spurwink, and I had to do a brochure for them about the FRP, like Family Reunification Program. Even back then, that left me a little uneasy because I've always felt like the child's welfare was more important than family reunification. But why don't you sort of explain, number one, how does somebody become, a foster parent, and what does that mean? What is a kinship provider? And then maybe a little bit more details about, why the state has put sort of a high value on family reunification and, how that affects foster parents.
Okay. I'll start by talking about how foster families become licensed. For my family, it took a little bit longer than normal. We had a large family with a lot of kids and a busy sports schedule, so we have to take a number of classes. We go through a training that's several weeks of once a week. We go in, learn about different aspects of taking care of children with trauma. All of this I've spent a decade and a half doing through Spurwink, because Spurwink requires your therapeutic crisis trained every 6 months. So this training is not to that extent, but it's very informative about the needs of the children. We have to complete that training. We go through a federal background check, as well as state fingerprinting every 2 years. And we have to maintain our license, by taking classes every 2 years. We need 18 credit hours of the training that we find on our own. We also we have to do a home inspection, which I will say was probably the most lengthy part for us. My husband and I have a lot of kids between us, and so they interview us separately. We basically lay out our entire lives, all of our background, the ups, the downs, the good, bad, and the ugly. You name it, it all comes out. And that's so that the department can decide if we're, emotionally stable and capable of taking care of these kids. And they talk to our children, age appropriate, of course, not young children, but our children at the time were all over 10, so all of our children got interviewed. Everything, you can think of is basically out on the table. So there's a lot of time invested in qualifying a foster family. And so foster families are what we're supposed to be, as a temporary home for a child who can't stay with their parent for safety reasons. And it's made known up front that the goal of the state of Maine's goal is reunification. Maine is a reunification state, and we're expected to support that. And that's kind of where our problems as foster parents sometimes come in, because we see things that aren't safe and, bring it to the attention of others. So that's what a foster family is. And then a kinship family is much like a foster family, only the term kinship is supposed to be used as a relative or a very close family member, or not a family member that has had a long-standing relationship with the child. So the difference in a kinship provider is typically that they don't have to be licensed. They're not licensed unless they just happen to be a licensed foster family. But they don't have the same checks as far as, the classes they have to take because they're blood. They do have to do the background checks, and they are supposed to receive the same services that a regular foster family has access to, so they should be able to be fairly comparable to a foster family. Sometimes they're not treated that way, and it's partially because I don't think they have the same access to information that others do. The other What was your other term?
Just back to reunification. So, the goal being, I guess, that a child returns to their family because that's better for the whole family, correct? Or is that
I think that their focus on the the Child Family Services website, you can find a chart that says their 5 goals. The first and primary goal is that the child at most is safe and free from harm. The second goal is the parents have a right to raise their own children. And then the third is nurturing home. The fourth is well cared for. And then the fifth is we're doing our job to the best of our ability. So
you've done your homework to list them off in absolute order there. That's amazing.
I have spent many nights doing a lot of research. But I'm not the type of person to question somebody's decision unless I've done my own research.
Yeah.
But so my discovery in finding all this information is that the focus is initially maybe getting the child out of an unsafe environment, but then very quickly turns to the child going back to the parents because that's the second goal.
Right.
Reunification. And at what cost? I mean, 178 deaths. And that report in itself, for anybody who's taken the time to read it, which I have several times, the history with those families is astronomical.
Yeah.
I mean, kids that have died and have been in care previously, or the mother has had previous kids removed. It's not, you can't read through that report and say that they're solely focused on being in a good environment and for the safety of the child when all these kids are dying and the history is right there.
Right. So I'm going to remind people real quick that they can give us a call tonight and they can phone in questions, and the phone number is 415-8489 if they want to call in with any questions. And I kind of want to switch over to Senator Diamond now.
What's that number again, Patrick?
415-8489.
Okay.
So I want to focus again on Senator Diamond and sort of what's been going on with the Government Oversight Committee, hearings, sort of what that process has looked like. How HHS has responded to these things is kind of important. I'm sure that you've heard from the commissioner there. It sounds like you've probably also heard from Director Landry and everything. But I'd like to get a little bit of oversight or some idea about what's going on there.
Let me start by saying that the Government Oversight Committee is doing a good job. Thank God they're doing their investigation. They've had 2 reports. The most recent one was based on child safety and the placement of children, and they got a horrible report on that. The outcome of how they measure up with federal guidelines and some state guidelines was dismal, to say the least, and it was shocking. Because if you listen to them talk, and when they're there and they give the testimony there before the GOC committee, you would think everything is fine. But, for example, the reunification, I sponsored legislation a few years ago that said reunification, it should be whatever is safest for the child, not necessarily reunification. Reunification is a political ideology, frankly. If you follow it through, that's what it is. And it's something that really should be considered, but it shouldn't be the dominant factor. And I can point out, for example, Ethan Henderson, who was killed by his father. Marissa Kennedy was killed by her mother and stepfather. Kendall Chick was killed by her grandfather's girlfriend. Maddox Williams, who was allegedly killed by his bio mother. He was taken from the grandmother and placed with the bio mother and then ended up dead with severe beatings, which caused his death. So reunification should be part of the consideration, but it shouldn't be given what some people give it, and that is the ultimate. Once you've checked off that box, because I think they've drilled this into the heads of caseworkers, saying, if you get a reunification, you've done fine, don't worry about it. So they do that, check off the box, walk away, and then you have these kids who are killed.
especially when, as she was saying, you've got, 5, criteria or whatever, that happens to be
Yeah.
the second criteria, and then what's even the criteria after number 5, right? Like, that's not,
Well, the unsaid
kind of
word
what we're-
is you better do reunification if you can, and that's what's preached to the caseworkers.
yeah.
And that's what they've told me, which is why I can say that. So what's happening with the GOC, Patrick, is that they're asking questions, but the people who are answering them, and it's not the commissioner, by the way, or the director, they've the last time they had a meeting, which was just June, whatever that was, or just
19.
recently, 19. So what happened was they asked these great questions, and then the department is so good at deflecting, you never get an answer. The only answers that they get are from people like Melanie, other foster parents, families of children who have died. The grandmother testified at one of the hearings for GOC of Maddox Williams. She said, I told them don't place him back with the biological mother, because it's not safe. In 3 months, he was dead. So that's where they learn. That's where people learn. You will not, I'm convinced now, and I'm going to, next July 20th is the next public hearing on the study that's being done, on the investigation, and I'm going to tell the committee, you need to hear from people like Melanie, you need to hear from other foster parents, you need to hear from people who experience what's going on, because you're not getting answers. You're getting bureaucratic deflections, which are not the truth.
I've always had some sort of success in getting answers, sometimes talking to people offline, right? Like
Yeah.
people with the departments and stuff like that. Have you talked to anybody
I have.
offline that happens to be a caseworker that's like, this doesn't really feel right, or?
When Kendall Chick and Marissa Kennedy were both died, I talked to several caseworkers, and it was off the record, believe me.
Yeah.
What they told me, and then when I went to the hearing, the trials, and the trials, you hear everything. You hear everything that's going on, you get the details, you see the autopsy reports, you see the photos, and you know exactly what happened. And for example, we had one caseworker testify at the Marissa Kennedy hearing with her mother, who was found guilty, by the way, of murder. It was indifference murder, depraved indifference murder of her child. And what the caseworker said was that Julio, the stepfather, was so charming, I didn't think there was anything to investigate, anything to look at. And the little girl, Marissa, passed out on the couch while she was there. I mean, that's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night, because a lot of these murders could have been prevented,
Right.
but they're not, and they need to be.
So who's investigating this? Like you said, we've said that the findings are being presented in front of the Government Oversight Committee, but who's doing the investigation into HHS?
The Government Oversight Committee, which is a very unique committee for the people who are watching, they have the ability to subpoena. There are even number of Republicans and Democrats, but their staff is a professional staff. They have 8 people on their staff, and that's all they do is investigate. Whatever may be assigned to them. This has been assigned to them. They've assigned in by the GOC committee. So they are a professional staff. They're doing the investigations, and they're making reports to the GOC.
Even if they have the ability to subpoena, do people have to tell the truth to the government?
Yeah, it's pretty, but they haven't used it in this investigation. But when I was on the committee, Government Oversight Committee, we subpoenaed for the Turnpike director who was convicted of fraud. We did the investigation. That's what GOC does.
Yeah.
So, and we subpoenaed
Yeah.
witnesses for that. So this committee has that power, and they can use it if they want to.
So there's stuff in statute that actually gives
Yes,
them
provides
that.
them to do it, yeah.
Yeah.
But some of the stories that Melanie has about retaliation, that's the other part of this which people don't talk about much, because the foster parents don't dare to talk about it, because they don't want to lose their kids. They love them. They don't want to lose their license. But if you don't follow the line in many cases, then the department, they will retaliate. I don't know if you want to tell the story or not, but you got a story that would, it gives me chills every time I hear it, about how they retaliated against someone, Melanie, who spoke up.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it if you want to tell it. It sounds like you've probably told it in front of the committee, so.
I have. My first share was over a Zoom call, and that was a little less intimidating than the next share. But I have shared it, and it's probably the worst single event my family has ever been through, and to have it caused by the department that we were trying, we were doing what we were told to do, and what we've given and sacrificed so much for. At the time, it was December, it was just before Christmas, December 9th, actually, we got a call.
Of last year.
Yep.
And so recently.
Yep. Well, I'll give you a little background of what my family was, what it looked like. We had 11 kids in our home. One was just an infant. We had a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Quite an age range, big packed house. It was crazy, but it was good. Managed, it had its moments, but we managed well. We had a sibling set that, for confidentiality, that's about all I can say, but we had some interesting caseworkers at the beginning. One that quit, and one that went on vacation and never told us. So by the time we get to our third caseworker, this case is an absolute mess. They came to us, very sweet kids. Not all we knew was, one particular thing and nothing else. No background information. So what happened is one of the children was having symptoms of, something serious happening to him, which we reported and didn't get anywhere with. As far as what they're supposed to do within the first 45 days, each case is supposed to have a SPUR-WINK child abuse evaluation. Every case is supposed to have that. This one didn't. I'm convinced to this day, and I said it to a supervisor who was very angry at me. Had that happened, we would not be here today. But in December, we got a call as we were getting ready to go out to dinner for my son's 18th birthday, and basically said that we had an allegation from one of the siblings. He's a young sibling. And the event that he described happening to him by my husband was pretty much exactly the event that was disclosed to us previously that we had reported to the department and sought services for. So what I was told by this caseworker was this, no need to panic. Foster families have allegations all the time. It's just par for the course, so to speak. Goes with the territory. What we're going to do is we'll send out somebody tomorrow. They'll talk to you very nonchalantly, not a big deal, but you have to cooperate with the process. She, said that she had been involved with our family for a long time. We'd had those children for 9 months. We had several other caseworkers for our different families. In a month, I had 5 different caseworkers visiting me every month, and they each have a representative, a legal representative for them, either a guardian ad litem or a CASA worker, which is the same thing as a guardian, but...
You're talking about the kids each have a legal
Yep,
representative?
the kids, and this is a whole nother issue, but the kids each are supposed to be assigned a person that just looks out for their interest.
Yep.
So the department has a plan, the parents have a plan, foster families might have a plan, but their person is supposed to advocate for them. In our experience, we've had several that have been very good. Really only one that did not do so. But sometimes that is part of the problem. And not to rabbit trail, every one of those people that were coming to my house on a monthly basis was very supportive of our family. We didn't have any issues. We didn't have any prior issues. I've been working with kids for 2 decades, and my husband and I have been married for almost 20 years. When we're licensed, so we're vested. We've been recertified every 2 years for 3 terms now. They said that they had to come and do this process. We participated in the process. We were told that the plan was to have each child interviewed and then my husband and I would be interviewed separately and then together. So we did this. It took a couple of days because there's a lot of kids. On Saturday, the last caseworker came out to interview us, said, I don't see anything. You should expect resolution and a call on Monday. None of the other caseworkers had any concerns that were raised. And asked us a couple more additional questions, which we answered and cooperated with. Then, unfortunately, on Monday, we didn't get an answer, which I've come to expect only because I know that the weekends are busy and Monday is kind of like catch-up day.
This is all happening over the Christmas holiday, too?
This is right before Christmas. And the 3-year-old that we had, this was December 9th, we were scheduled for an adoption on December 22nd. He's been with us for his entire life. We got him right out of the hospital. Termination had already happened. So termination is when the judge decides that the parents cannot raise the child and he's up for adoption. We had him the whole time, where we do believe in some cases reunification is best, but when it's not, we always consider if we're asked for adoption. Without a doubt in our mind, we absolutely. He's been there. Why create another trauma? He's a wonderful kid. So we were scheduled to adopt on the 22nd. That changed drastically. Once Monday came around, I called. I didn't get a return call. And then on Wednesday morning, I got a call from the investigator from Augusta. And she said that there was a meeting that we needed to would take place with herself. Her and I had done phone interviews, but she would need to come out to my house and interview my husband and I directly. And because of their policy, they have a local police officer join, which terrified me, to be honest. I've never been in that position.
Sure.
So that was supposed to happen at some time on Friday, though she didn't have an exact time, but that was the plan that we were told that day. Wednesday night comes around, and it's dinner time. We're all getting ready to sit down to eat, and we get a knock at the door. My husband answers. I'm trying to get the kids to the table, and he comes over. His face is white, and he says, Mel, there's a bunch of cops at the door, and the caseworker is here, and you need to come here. Caseworker asked me to step outside. I'm like, my kids are all sitting at the table. What's going on? She said, well, there's been another report, and I need to discuss this with you. So I went in and I asked, and we have a house, we had 5 teenagers at the time, so they took the little kids out of earshot and played games upstairs. And I came back outside, and she said, there's been another report. It's different, but it's similar, and I'm here to take all the foster kids out of your home, including the 3-year-old that we were scheduled now just a week away from adopting.
Wow.
And right before Christmas. I had thousands of dollars of presents under the tree in preparation. I was beyond upset. And actually was so upset that I ended up having a seizure on my front porch. Now, there were 3 cops there and 3 cruisers there, each had 2 cops. So for some reason, I'm not exactly sure why, they found it necessary to have all those people and 3 different caseworkers, primarily because there was a lot of foster kids. But I felt like the SWAT team was coming to my home and taking over my life. And we've had an ongoing relationship with the department for all these years. It's not all been pretty. We have had one disagreement with the department years ago, but it was resolved in a sociable, appropriate manner. And this was just not. And what I came to find out later, and I've shared this before, the caseworker didn't have pertinent information about my family. The additional report that was made that ended up triggering this whole event was done by a community member that has a history with my family of unstable behavior. And without going into too many details about that, it's been a couple good years, a couple bad years, it just goes through phases, is the best I can describe it. This person had kind of an obsession with one of the household members, wasn't really appropriate, and decided to up the ante and make the second report, which was fabricated, completely fabricated. And that's what triggered the whole event. And after our interview a couple weeks later with this caseworker, we sat at my table for 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and I said, and I actually had proof. You know, I knew it was her. I had evidence of all the past issues we had already that was in my file. Part of, when you asked me about what foster parents need to do, and I said, we lay it all out on the table, we really do. And this was all laid out on the table. They knew all the experience I had with this person, but this particular caseworker had no idea. She claimed she didn't have access to that information, and I'm really not sure why that was. But they took all of the kids, and then
So in the end, the kids got traumatized again.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Which, that's what those kids need, is more trauma.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the 3-year-old, in essence, had really no trauma because he was with us his whole life. I mean, he had visits with his bio mom for a little while, but, you know, she consented to termination, and, you know, she knew it was what was best for him.
So did the department actually think that you were guilty of something? Or
They-
did they?
Well, they say they did.
Yeah.
But what happened at our sit-down meeting, which we have recorded, it's their policy to record, and since they were recording, we recorded, and this was done in front of the detective as well. She brought up the allegations and described them, and we were able to show her this particular person that made that second report had sent a text message to another person saying, hey, I did this, and I want you to kind of jump on the bandwagon. Not using those words, but basically saying, hey, you should make another report to keep this going. Basically, I mean, gaslighting, I guess, so to speak. We had proof of that. So by the time she left, she knew that this wasn't anything. But the problem was, once the ball was going, there was no stopping it.
Yep.
So we had to go through it.
Truly terrible people in the world, aren't there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just this awful. So, is there a huge need out there for foster parents? I imagine, there is, and then this story is probably has people rethinking even going down.
It does. I mean, my district alone, I get an email Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes mid-Friday, sometimes on the weekend. The need is huge. We have probably the busiest district, and we're licensed, and, we're taking a break for right now, but probably almost as bad as the removal of our children was the games that the department played after. This was the retaliation part, because I was reaching out and questioning, and I was consistent about it, and then people were getting upset. I was told, these caseworkers that I was working with were not allowed into the meetings, which is not typical. They weren't sharing information with the guardian ad litem. Everything was secretive, and it was being handled in central office, which at the time, I had no dealings with. I had never spoken to anybody at central office. But something flagged our file, and they started reacting, and then when our findings came back, not substantiated, which means that they did all their investigation and found nothing, we were playing these games.
Afterwards,
A licensing violation, because I've talked to several caseworkers, typically can be resolved in, at the quickest 24 hours. Usually takes 2 to 3 business days, maybe a week. Ours took 6.
Wow.
And it was time and time after they were saying, oh, well, I'm not quite done with it. And then it got to a point where I was being told that central office was handling it and they needed to re-review. Then they were asking me for additional things regarding my case that they hadn't asked for before, but the case was closed. So when I said no, then an email went out to my attorney, whom I'd obtained by this point. Email went out, well, your clients aren't cooperating. So, it's going to take longer. And then, well, it's Friday at 3 o'clock and we can't do anything this weekend. I mean, this went on for weeks.
Yeah. So you were able to adopt your little boy, right?
Eventually, yes.
God.
Yep.
Yeah, can you imagine? I mean,
But we had 2
it's
others
terrible.
that there was 2 others in the process of termination. One went to what they call a fictive kin, but was an old neighbor. I'm not really sure how that qualifies, but and then another one is kind of MIA. So it's everybody experienced more trauma than they needed to, and for what could have been resolved after 35 days or handled completely different. And what I tried to say when I reached out to upper management was, why could the person that has an issue or concerns, can we just have a meeting? Because there was all these games about, oh, you have to talk to this person, and this person passes the buck to somebody else. The communication was ridiculous.
So I'd like to remind people that if they have any questions, they can give us a call at 207-415-8489. And then I'd like to give it back to Senator Diamond. So we've talked a lot about fostering and kids and parents and reunification and sort of those interim, family members that could be involved kind of in fostering as well and stuff like that. What else did the Government Oversight Committee find in this report?
They found that they measured how Maine is performing with federal standards. On child safety was the most recent one. And that's the one that we have an ombudsman, child welfare ombudsman. It's an independent agency. And what she does is she evaluates how the department functions, how they take care of kids. And for the last 2 years in a row, her annual report has said repeatedly that the Office of Child Family Services still struggles in placing children in safe environments. Now, that's a humongous issue. I mean, if they can't do that much, then they can't do anything. And that's one of the things that keeps me up at night is because, if they would just focus on that one piece, and you got an independent agency that is now reporting to the legislature, to the public, 2 years in a row saying they're not doing it. They're still not doing it. And that happened after Marissa Kennedy in 18 and Kendall Chick in 17. And then we had last June, we had kids dying, murdered, basically, 1 a week. And we ended up with 6 for the last year. So they're not putting kids in safe places. And when you go in, when GOC or anybody else goes in and tries to find out why, it's almost impossible, which is why I tried to get the Office of Child Family Services pulled out of that humongous department and sit by itself so that everybody can see it. The transparency is there. You try to pull back that curtain to peek behind it, see what they're really doing, and boy, you just find another wall.
More curtains go
up. You can't get there. And again, I'm convinced after 21 years of this that the only way it's going to resolve itself is the public, the legislature knows what really is happening by listening to those who experience it every day. But they're not going to speak up if they're worried about their losing their license or the child they love. So that's the dichotomy it takes a lot of courage to speak up, but once they do, that's where the real answers lie.
So sadly, in the legislature, and you and I both, been there over the years, like we funded more positions, right, within there, like more of these, workers. And I mean, it sounds like the workers can do, some pretty wild stuff listening to your story. And I don't know if they're being replaced or, they're just safe because they need somebody else there. But I think this kind of maybe speaks to a greater issue that Bill and I probably sort of very familiar with, that, when we vote on an annual budget and we put a bunch of money, do you know what I mean, into it for some positions, right? And they're supposed to hire people, right? Like, for a lot of legislators, they clap their hands together and say we did our job, right? But now it is kind of digging into the process maybe and saying, well, maybe we didn't do our.
I mean, throwing money at it. You did it on approach. You hired more people, but that's all you could do because that's all you knew about doing. But the problem is when you do that, first off, there's an 18-month training period, so you're not going to solve the right off quick, and then they leave.
Yeah.
I don't blame the caseworkers. I blame the management because they will not teach these caseworkers the way to do it and back them up and stop playing politics with them, and that's what they do.
What does it take to become a caseworker? What is sort of the qualification for that?
You probably know this better than I do. I mean, there's a social worker, clinical social worker, and all that goes with that. But you have to be a social worker, right, Mel?
Yep, it's a LSW bachelor's degree, and then you have to take. This came out at the committee meeting the other day. You have to take 12 additional classes at the department, but one of the legislators had asked what those were, but DHS wasn't able to answer that. Nor was she able to answer the starting salary, which I can tell you that as well. But it's not, I mean, they deserve much more. And the sad thing is, it's not having more positions. They don't retain the positions they have. I have spoken to several caseworkers personally. I have a caseworker that I'm very close to, and I know several that have quit during my debacle, I'll call it. 2 of my caseworkers quit, and they had been at the department for over 5 years, approaching 10. We lost a guardian ad litem as well. They get tired of going to the department and saying, this needs to change, and then nothing happens. And they're left holding the bag. Plus, the response to hiring more caseworkers is, well, what are we doing? We're going to the college campuses to recruit recent graduates, which, that's great, but I can tell you that when I graduated from college and now, there's a whole lot that happens with life experience. You don't get that when you're fresh out of the gate.
I've actually heard this from a lot of social workers, knocking doors or people I know and stuff like that, and they say that part of the issue that they see is that somebody goes off and gets their social work degree, and then they don't do any social work. And then what they do is they're like immediately like, well, I want to make some more money, so I'm going to get my master's degree. Right. But, they haven't had any experience, actually in the field prior to getting that degree, so they don't have, enough practical knowledge sort of, going into it. So it seems like what they're saying is that the path has actually, changed to working in the field.
I mean, they had 35 vacancies they admitted to at the last GOC meeting, 35. And like Melanie said, an innocent question, well, how much do you pay? The people didn't know. I run a company. I can tell you what my starting pay is for every shift, for weekends, but they had no idea. I'll have to get back to you, which says to me that they really are not invested in this.
There's a disconnect.
There's a disconnect between the hiring, and it's like they're going through the motions, like they do everything. They go through the motions, and there's really no commitment, no hardcore commitment to making some changes.
Wow.
Sad. But we're not going to let up.
Spoke to a caseworker last weekend, actually, and I said, because she was sharing that she just hit her two-year mark, and she's now considered fully trained. But didn't get her raise review because of her paperwork not being turned in on time. But her paperwork's not turned in on time because they have her doing things in her job that aren't part of her job, like supervising visits and stuff like that. But She said it's not the pay. She said, I don't do this for the pay. I don't care about the pay, because I had asked in response to a question Senator Timberlake had brought up during that meeting at GOC. And he said, well, is it salary? Do they need more money to attract, do you need more money to attract the people that are coming in? And, this person that I just spoke to said, no, it's not the money. It's the fact that they don't care. I am completely burnt out by the responsibilities and the things I'm asked to do. And then when push comes to shove, they don't stick up for me. And they leave. And, I had two personally that left between December and February. I know of 4 others that left that District 3, recently. I'm sure there's more. And, this particular person I was speaking with, she's been there for about 2 years. She's been there for 2 years, and said that her area and the office started with 18 caseworkers. And in the 2 years, she's there and there's 2 others. Everybody else is gone.
Yeah.
So where does that responsibility fall? It falls on the people that are still there.
So you end up with people that are kind of no longer passionate about their job, and then
They're
kind
overloaded.
of end
Overloaded,
up going through the motions.
Right. And then the management's looking down on them to point a finger.
Point a finger
case
because
something
they don't
goes
want to
on.
accept
They won't.
responsibility.
I mean,
Right.
it's a typical political situation. I mean, you got the commissioner who's wants to make sure that, in this case, takes care of the director takes care of the commissioner, so you got that thing going, and the people on the front line are the ones that take the heat,
Wow.
and they deserve better.
Yeah.
And again, until people hear the truth about what's really going on in that Office of Child and Family Services, until people on appropriations hear the truth, the people who allocate the money, nothing's going to change. You're going to get the same bureaucratic deflections and the same cover-ups that you've been getting for the last 20, that I've seen the last 21 years.
I mean, it sounds like just a really complicated problem for the public to understand,
It is,
right? So that,
right.
Unless you've kind of, been in the legislature, familiar with it, and kind of seen how the bureaucracy,
Right.
kind of works, behaves, and even understand, who's an employee versus who's, appointed, right? We talked about that,
Yep.
that earlier. It's kind of hard to see how these other, problems sort of fall into that
Yes,
and relate
it's
to
true.
it, because, people definitely always say that, like a state job's like a really great job to get, because,
Right.
you can
Good benefits.
good benefits probably will never be laid off,
Right, yeah.
or anything like that, but that
I'm just so concerned, we got other kids out there who are going to be subject to placements. I don't think they've improved a bit with their safety placements. I think there's other things that are guiding them, and I just wait for the next innocent child to die.
So so you talked a little bit, I'm really curious about this now. You talked about, Spurwink, but there's other sort of social service agencies that are kind of out there in the state and everything else, and they're obviously contracted, right, to do this work. Like, how does that work? Does the money follow the child? And
Well, in essence, it should, but sometimes if the child is, a lot of the problems that have also been coming up, or the conversations that have arisen recently, have been with people not getting paid. I haven't invested a whole lot of time in delving into this, but personally, some of the services that were supposed to be paid for weren't. So we're getting, not only are we taking care of the kids and all the stuff that goes with that, but we're getting bills. Or we're submitting forms for mileage reimbursement that aren't ever getting paid. So depending on who you talk to, you may get a little bit more than I can provide, but I think there is some consensus in the group that I am involved with that, sometimes you follow the money, you follow the problem, and, it's disappearing out there, but the services aren't happening. which is kind of disconcerting as well, because so now they're not managing the safety of children, they're not managing the money correctly. What is going on?
Wow.
And if you tag that into, if they're making mistakes and kids are dying, they don't want to admit that.
Right.
So there's a cover-up, backs up, and so you can't, it's hard to get in until they have a trial. Now, there'll be a trial in October for this Maddox Williams in Stockton Springs that was allegedly beat to death by his biological mother. A lot will come out during that trial, and I won't miss 1 minute of that trial. And that's when we're going to find out the role that HHS played, when they put that child back in with his mother. We're going to find all these things out. But the problem is we have to wait, a year and a half to have the trial.
Right.
And
So you and I aren't going to be there come
Right.
December. We've
Right.
termed out. They're kicking us out.
kicking us out,
Like,
yeah.
so long, guys.
I'm sure the department
Right.
is really pleased to see me go.
Yeah.
But I got a surprise for them. I'm not really going.
so the government, sometimes you can do more on the outside than you
Right.
can actually do on the inside.
Exactly.
So the Government Oversight Committee, that'll possibly have a whole fresh new crop
Right.
of
They can start all over
legislators
again.
and new people to kind of look at it. Do they have the authorization to report out bills and everything?
Yes, and they're going to put a report together for the next GOC committee when they end.
Yeah.
They have one more report in September
Yeah.
on reunification, by the way. You know
That should
I
be a
know.
good one.
So they'll do that one, and then they'll have a final report they'll pass on. But realistically, you and I both know, with mostly new legislators coming onto that committee, they're going to start over. And the department is so good at grooming people. They can groom legislators, and they're really good at become buddies, and so you become nice friends, and therefore you stop asking hard questions.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen with GOC. They're still asking hard questions.
Yeah. No, that's just the thing, and that could even get political too. Like
Yep.
sometimes, like the party where the governor is the
Right.
in control, will defend departments, right?
Yep.
And I mean I've seen that, and
Yep.
I've been there under a Republican administration and a
Yep.
Democrat administration now, and I can say that happens.
Say the Senate chair, Senator Libby,
Yeah.
he's not pulling any punches with these
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and he's not going out of his way to protect Governor Mills and her
Yeah.
department. I've really been impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, he's being straightforward about it, at least to this point, and I fully expect that he will.
I always feel like when punch, comes to, why am I forgetting the idiom here? But anyways, when the chips are actually down, there's another one. Like, I always feel like the legislature does act responsibly, though. Do you know what I mean? That a lot of the time, politics do get,
Right.
ditched
Yep.
at that point.
Yep.
You've got to run for office the next time around, and I'm not saying that's what necessarily should motivate people
Right.
and stuff like that, but you certainly can't be seen as playing
Especially on this issue.
on this issue. It's an issue
Kids-
like this
with kids'
exactly.
lives.
Yeah,
You can't be doing that. That's exactly right.
You don't want to be on the
Like-
wrong
And who
side of the
knows?
coin.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a new administration. You can't tell.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a toss-up right now, too. So we're in a
So-
situation where
So then we get another commissioner, and we get
there'd be
another
whole-
director.
yeah, there'd be another whole new set. But,
Wow.
so, I mean, there's a lot yet to be played. I think this will become a campaign issue, frankly.
Yeah, yeah.
This.
So I think that we're slightly past our time, our original time, but let's go a few more minutes, and I'll just let you guys have some closing remarks here about what you think should be, done differently, going forward, and your hopes for, laws that come up, and things the department should consider, and being better stewards of our children.
I always learn a lot when Melanie's talking, so I'll let you go, and
And
I'll tag on at the end.
no pressure, thanks. I honestly, I would like to see more accountability and communication factored into how the department does its business. I don't think that anybody can look at all aspects of this, and if you think of it like a triangle, and they're at the top, and then they have foster families with kinship, these are the people taking care of the kids. They're not working with us appropriately, and they're not maintaining good relationships, which is crucial. I mean, these are kids' lives we're talking about, and it's not just safety, physical safety, it's their emotional well-being. And the decisions that they make, if they're trying to keep them safe, but they're bouncing them from house to house to house, to placement here and there and everywhere, or they're going to send them home because they think it's safe enough, and then, as I have a half a dozen probably families that have taken a kid for the second time. I had a kid for the second time, This is not emotional, it's not their emotional well-being. So if they can't maintain a relationship with Keep Us, and foster families are leaving in droves, they can't, in Opega, the research behind the GOC, they did the research and they found that same thing with caseworkers. So the lower level caseworkers are treated, just as bad as we are in a lot of cases. So if they're not managing relationships with us or them, then it has to be an upper management problem. It's just basic business. You have a cultural problem at the top, it needs to be fixed. And how do you fix that? Well, for one, you need open and honest communication. I've said this several times to different people. If there's a decision to be made and you need 6 people to make that decision, then every one of those people need to be at a meeting together. So there's none of this, behind the table talk, working around things or covering up or what have you. It is much easier to do a better job when you have somebody who's seasoned and willing to stay than it is to have to keep recruiting new people and starting the cycle all over again. I would love to see the department focus on communication for both foster families and caseworkers to figure out how they can keep their caseworkers employed and not burnt out, and to keep foster families. And for, I'm not a caseworker, so I can't speak exactly to that, but I would say as a foster family, we need to be heard, and we need to be heard without being afraid. I was terrified when I first came out. I was in the process of trying to get my 3-year-old back, and I took a leap of faith and told my story, and I haven't stopped since because I care, not just about that one child, but all the other children that didn't come back. And I don't want to lose my license. I don't want to be labeled. I mean, the whole town it's a small town. People talk. You're the one that,
Or cop cars show up at their 3 with
Right.
6 officers, and
Right.
geez, that's like the whole freaking town.
Exactly. It's a small town. I want to be cooperative. I'm not a wave maker. I don't look for trouble. I'm content just doing what I'm supposed to do. But when you put me in a position to make me make a decision that's not in the best interest of a child, I am going to speak up. And I would encourage people to continue to speak up, because that's what needs to happen in order for upper level change to happen. And really, I just thought about this not too long ago, but having a real foster parents' Bill of Rights, which is another term, but it is an actual thing. It says that foster parents have all these, things that they're entitled to, so to speak. But it's not enforced, and there's nowhere to go when you have a complaint. There's only so many things that the ombudsman can deal with, and a lot of the complaints that they get over there are not things that she can focus on. And, she's one person, so how can she possibly do all that? I would personally like to see something like the ombudsman just for foster families and kinship providers and people that are taking care of these kids to reach out and say, I'm at a standing point here where I am fighting with the department over this issue. I'm concerned, but I'm getting nowhere. And, I'm going to have consequences if I keep pushing, because that's what happens.
So that ombudsman is a one-person office. Then that's scary.
We just added more staff to them this time.
I mean, I did a lot of work on a couple of bills with the long-term care ombudsman in the state, and they had a whole staff. They had, the head of it, who was a wonderful, person, to work with, and then she had 6 or 7 people that worked with her, and that's probably what this needs to.
We added a couple more administrative people to it this time, but they need more.
It's killing me, and I feel like you know, I mean, you've obviously been traumatized now, but I think about, you know, the number of, you know, adverse childhood experiences, you know what I mean? These kids have already been subjected to, and just adding more trauma on top of that is heartbreaking. It's tragic.
It is. I mean, just leaving to come out here, you know, and I don't leave home very often.
Yeah.
My 3-year-old is like, when are you coming back? He's stressed because he was gone for 2 months.
Right.
You know, it affected him, you know, when it didn't need to happen. It could have been
I
handled.
plead guilty to dragging Melanie around. She's doing pretty good. But the final comment I would make is that the Office of Child Family Services has got a severe cultural problem. And Mel mentioned it, but until that culture is changed, and by the way, it's been a cultural problem as far back as I go to King's administration in 2001. The difference is,
But that seems structural too. Like
It
that's
is.
because of the way we do business
Right,
in
it
the
is.
state.
the difference between then and now is they're much better now at deflecting. They're really good at that. So even when seasoned legislators ask questions, this last public comment period, or the comment from the department, most of the answers, we'll have to get back to you. I don't know that. We've got a group working on it. There was very few that were actual definite answers.
Those
So
commissioners get their jobs because they're very sly.
very tricky. So we got to change the culture. Kids' lives depend on it. And until people like Melanie, and she's very courageous, speaks out, and others start speaking out, then that's what's going to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you both for coming
Thanks for having us.
on
Thank you.
tonight. It's certainly an important, you know, topic, and we could talk about it for hours, but Brad's not going to give us hours.
No.
So I'd like to thank my producer, Brad Saucier, for putting this on tonight, and then also Sheila Corey, my wife, for answering all of those phone calls that came in, but we were able to fill it without the phone calls.
Oh, absolutely.
So great evening. Thank you
Thank you,
both so
Patrick,
much.
for having us.
And,
Appreciate it.
and thank you for tuning in, Wyndham. Thanks. Good night.